equipping you to navigate your grief journey after child loss. This is the Hope After Child Loss podcast. On each episode, we explore the many challenges of grief as guests share their stories of loss. It's also a place where you will hear about God showing up in our darkest moments and restoring meaning, purpose, and hope to shattered lives. Hey everyone, welcome. We're so glad you could join us. I'm your host, Greg Buffkin, and today I will be talking with David Szweda. David and his family live in Florida, and they lost their son, Hudson, to suicide last year, January of 23. Here's my conversation with David. Well, David, welcome to our podcast today. It's really great to have you.
Thank you very much, Greg. I am really looking forward to this. Thank you.
Well, yeah, it's an honor to have you, David. So, David, why don't you take a minute or two and just kind of bring us up to speed. Tell us, go back as far as you would like with your story. And if you want to include anything that's going on with you guys today, a year and a half later, we can do that. But if you want to take some time and talk about your son, Hudson, we would love to hear about him.
Sure, definitely. So, I am married. My wife, Charla. We have 3 kids. We live in Florida, and all of my kids are older now. The youngest is in college. And yes, Hudson. So Hudson is my oldest child, or was my oldest child. He is the one that we lost. And he was just, a great kid. When you lose someone, it's a percentage out of the family, but it's not always the same percentage-wise as the number that they take up in the family.
Yeah,
and
right.
Hudson was just, a much bigger presence in our family than just 1/5 of our family. So, as his firstborn son, always holds a special place in your heart as a first child, even though you love all your kids. Just something about the firstborn. And
Sure.
Great kid, very easy. He was a happy kid, always full of joy, no troubles at all when he was a young kid. In fact, it was fairly easy. And he was definitely a unique kid. So he was full of joy, loved trains. But, another aspect of him is he was always a really stubborn kid. And, sometimes that could be really good. He could be stubborn in the right ways. And
so did he get that from you or Charla?
I don't know where he got that from, but if he liked something or he wanted to do something, he went for it. And so, one of the things that, he was very passionate about was rowing. And so he had tried a number of different sports like many kids do, and he never quite felt like he fit in. And we were driving across a bridge one day and saw a bunch of rowers down here in Florida. And it looked interesting, and I said, "Hey, let's go try to check it out." So we went and checked it out, and he just gravitated to it. The first day that we went and just hopped in a boat and tried it, that was it. He was sold, and that became a huge part of his life for about 4 or 5 years in high school. He was a very, very good rower, competitive nationally. He ranked 10th in the nation.
Oh, wow!
This last year, and it was very big part of his life. He was a hard worker. He was a hard worker both in rowing. Obviously, rowing takes a lot of hard work. He used to always wear a shirt that said, rowing is the only sport that started out as a form of capital punishment. It just takes so much work. And so he graduated high school. And, I think one of the things he struggled with was kind of finding his place after high school. Rowing was such a big part of his life. And I think, he struggled a little bit trying to figure out what is he going to do. He didn't want to go to college. And so he started working as an electrician. And then I'd say about 2 years ago, he actually started working for me in a tire business. He wanted to kind of work with me and kind of try to learn how to start things on his own. And so he really enjoyed that. But I think, definitely after high school, he started struggling some. And I would say he didn't struggle any more, at least from my perception, than a lot of kids do growing up, just trying to find their way and dealing with life things and dealing with relationships. But deep inside, he was struggling with stuff, and he did not share it. He was, just like I said, he was stubborn. He was stubborn revealing stuff, so he kept it inside of him, and we would never really knew anything that he was struggling with. He
Yeah.
was never diagnosed with anything. He wasn't struggling from that perspective. It was all just internal into him, and so I think it just boiled up at one point, and it just overcame him during that moment.
Yeah. Well, even though you guys didn't have a diagnosis, do you think that he battled with depression at all?
I think, we were able to go back and look through things because we really struggled on why did he do this, because we didn't see it coming. We had a very frank conversation. I had a very close relationship with my son. We liked the same music. We liked to do the same things. We hung out. I mean, I lost not just a son, but in a lot of ways a really close friend. And so I felt like I really knew him. But, going through his stuff, what we really found out is that he lacked self-confidence. And I think in a couple of times, looking back at old texts that he sent to other people and stuff, he was dealing with a sense of self-hatred. And he often said that he always looked at things half empty. He had a hard time looking at things sometimes positively when bad things happened. And so I think those are probably contributing elements of whatever he was struggling with that we just did not see. Because, really on the outside, you couldn't tell that he was struggling with something. I mean, this kid, he walked into a room, he could make everyone laugh. Yeah. Everyone. He was a best friend.
It's interesting that you say that, because our son Ryan was much the same way. He battled with depression and anxiety, but to meet him, you would never have a clue.
Yeah.
He kept a lot of it inside, just like Hudson did.
Yeah. And that's something I've heard quite consistently, right? And that's often one of the hard times. It's not that suicide paints a really interesting face that you can just see. You can't. So many people that we've met just had no clue. And not have a clear understanding. And even if they did have a little bit of a clue, never thought it was as bad as what it ended up occurring.
So he was the guy that always wanted to make everybody else laugh.
Oh, yeah. And he loved little kids. Loved them.
Yeah. Well, our sons had a lot in common. That is very cool. Dealing with suicide, man, it just leaves so many unanswered questions, that we want answers to so badly, but we know that we're probably never going to get them on this side of heaven. It leaves you questioning a lot of things, and it adds I think an additional layer of complication to the whole grief process. For you and Charlotte, what did that look like?
Yeah, I think, just like you said, it leaves unanswered questions. And I think one of the challenges you face in a situation like this is you try to fill in answers to those questions and try to make that reality. So, I'll give you an example. I think a lot of people, they'll look back and they'll say, wow, if we had done this or we'd done that, or if he had done this, it would have changed the outcome. And, I think professionals term that hindsight bias, right? We have information about the situation that we did not have at that time. And it is really easy to get stuck in that level of grief. And I call it kind of a conundrum, where you are dealing with these questions where there is no answer. And one of my relatives had talked to us about this right after this had happened. He said, one of the things you've got to be very careful is that Satan will want to get you into this black hole of these questions, because he can keep you there because there's no answer to them.
Exactly.
And he can just keep you in there. And there's an element, too, of grief where you kind of wallow a bit in that, too, as well. And so you wallow into this whole thing and you get into this kind of mode. And we had to get to a point where we had to have confidence that we made the best decisions with the information we had. We were there as parents in the best way that we possibly could with what we knew at the time and what we did. And that does not mean that you still don't have questions and they still don't creep up. They do. You got to always be fighting them, and it's a daily battle. But I have also felt there's an element of my faith that has grown in this too, with this uncertainty, because I feel like we as people want to have answers and comfort in everything in our life. And we don't in many aspects of our life. We don't know what will happen with our job tomorrow. But we have this faith sense of security in the fact that I have a job today, so I won't have a problem tomorrow. In this situation, with all these questions that are left unanswered in this, and just this conundrum, you actually have to lean a lot on your faith and really have to say, it is uncertain. I do not know why things happen, why they went the way they did. And I just have to have faith that God's in control and things are working out. And again, this is a daily struggle, right? This is, you
You're
wake up in
right.
the morning and you have to preach these things in your mind every day, because it's not like we can sit here and just say, oh yeah, we just have faith and everything goes away. It doesn't. It's a struggle.
Yeah, that is so accurate. And in that whole process, I'm curious, did you guys deal with very much false guilt?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I'll just give you one example. And, him and I both liked to shoot. And we'd go out and do shooting. And, he was 24 years old. And I bought him a handgun 2 weeks before he took his life, and there's a huge amount of guilt around that, right? But then at the end of the day, you're like, well, you can't hold yourself to that, because you don't know what would have happened either way.
It's uncanny how our stories mirror each other, David, because I had guilt over the exact same thing, because I bought Ryan his first handgun. And I'll tell you, I struggled with that for a while. And the enemy will really zero in on you on things like that, doesn't he?
Oh, yeah, it's big time. But at some point, you've got to really push yourself into pushing those things off, because you can't dwell on them. It'll just eat you up inside.
That is so true. So true. For you guys, David, when you lose a child, it's unlike anything else I think that an individual could ever experience. I mean, the trauma of it, people that have never experienced cannot even begin to imagine it. And it's more than just emotions. How did losing Hudson affect you guys? And you can speak for yourself or for you and Charla both if you'd like. But how did it affect you guys mentally and physically?
Oh yeah. So both my wife and I are both very steady emotionally, mentally. We are, I kind of consider ourselves a bit of a rock, and it doesn't mean that we don't have our ups and downs, but we don't really get too emotional about things. This wrecked us big time. You can't imagine the amount of pain and suffering that you go through this on the other side of this. I had friends who this had happened, and I imagined what it would be like, but it was nothing like what it actually did happen.
Right.
And to me, it was kind of phases, right? So the very beginning, I would say the first couple of days, you're just in a haze. Nothing matters. I had a big important job. I just had to check out of my job, had to focus on this. It didn't even matter if they had let me go. It didn't matter if my house burned down, nothing. You were just in this haze of reality. And then very quickly, we hit into this, don't know how I could ever move on, right?
Yeah.
How do you move on from this thing? And you just don't know how you're going to live. And, my kids had never seen me cry before. I don't think I ever cried, in the last 30 something years of that. I was a mess.
I can identify.
Yeah. And then you start moving into, okay, how can we move on and how can we even survive? Okay, maybe I can move on. After a couple of weeks, you start realizing we can probably move on, but I don't know if I can really survive. And, one thing that we learned kind of early is we had to make sure that we gave ourselves space to be a mess. We had to let ourselves collapse and fall. So if I just was going to collapse, I would just go into a separate room and just collapse. I would leave my meeting at work a little bit early, and I just had to fall apart. And it was important for both my wife and I both not to feel guilty for being a mess either. And so we had to give ourselves a lot of room and grace. And I would say my first year was really, how was I going to survive this? I just didn't know how I was going to survive it. I didn't know what life looked like moving through this. I had two other great kids. It was very hard for me to figure out how to be a good father to them when I didn't even know if I could, keep moving on and surviving. I would say that the second year that we've entered into it, I have tried to work really hard at how can I thrive. So I've now realized that after my first year, okay, you can survive this. It's not good. It's messy. It doesn't feel great. But I was able to make it through my first year, and I didn't think I could even go that far, through the whole thing, just with all the suffering and the grief. And so this year I'm really trying to figure out how to kind of thrive, and a lot of that's really trying to put something together. But I would say at the very end of my first year, I had started getting some PTSD. And I really started getting a lot of PTSD at the end of last year. And that was a big struggle. And I had been working with a therapist for a little while, and we really got into trying to overcome the PTSD and, putting the tools in place. And it was really just a lot of thought processes and put my tools in place, understanding what can trigger things, how to, give myself space when I think there's going to be a triggering event, or making sure I try to avoid certain things. And so I would say that was a big part of this transition from the first year to the second year. I think I'm getting to the point where I'm understanding the PTSD better. I still have it, but it's much more spread out. And, this year I'm really starting to try to figure out, how do I move forward? How can I thrive as an individual despite this happening to me? Not that I can let it go away, but how do I live bigger than this problem?
Yeah, I think that is so important. And to that, you talked about the first year, how hard that was, and I think that is true for anybody who loses a child. I think that obviously you go through a whole year of firsts. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that, I think that adds just a very acuteness to the pain, because you have to walk through things for the first time without your child.
Yep.
And I want to ask you this too, David. Did you find yourself during that first year particularly sometimes feeling like you didn't even want to survive?
I mean, I never felt in a space where I should take my life or anything like that. And I know that is a real issue for a lot of people,
Yeah.
struggling with that. That was not something I did struggle, but I will tell you, kind of tangential to what you said, I noticed quite quickly that this propensity for death, or this wall or fear of death that people typically had, that washed away pretty quickly.
Yeah.
We were to the point that I got diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, it really wouldn't have bothered me a whole lot. I didn't really think, and I don't know if it would bother me now a whole lot. I think you just feel like you just want to be done with it all, because you don't know how you can go live another 30 or 40 years. I don't know how younger parents deal with this, because they've got a lot longer roadmap than I do. I'm 53, and so mine's a bit shorter, but still I look out at 30 more years of trying to live with this, and it is daunting. I would tell you that, some days it's better than others, and you try to hold on, that you hope that you get more good days than bad days. And, we're starting to see a little bit of that in the second year, but there is a real sense of, I'm done now. I'm done with life. I don't think I want to keep going.
Yeah, I think I know for us, one of the things that I think particularly for me that changed after we lost Ryan was I lost a lot of the things that I feared prior to that. I mean, when you walk through something like that, you experience what you believe to be the absolute worst. It leaves you with little to fear.
Yeah. So definitely.
I could totally identify with what you were saying. So, as you were talking about how you and Charla started processing that, men and women often grieve differently. every individual grieves differently, but men and women tend to grieve a bit differently.
Yeah.
How did you guys do that? How did you give each other the space to grieve as individuals, but to also be there to grieve with each other? And what did it look like for you versus what you saw with Charla?
Yeah, and I think, looking back now, this is again hindsight, I think we did a fairly good job of it, but to be honest with you, it was by accident. We didn't know. There was no good book that you could have picked up and just figured this all out.
No,
But
there's not.
I think we made a concerted effort to find moments where we could grieve together and find moments where we could grieve separately. And I'll explain a little bit about that. So, with the grieving together, one thing that we did was we went to grief group together as a couple. We wanted to participate in that. That allowed me to hear things that she was saying and what she was going through, allowed her to hear what I was going through. And so we had a pretty strong, what they call survivors of suicide grief groups here in the Jacksonville, Florida area. And they have them in different parts of the city each week. And we just went to every single one of them. So
Did you?
every single week we were at one and going. And sometimes we'd be in the same group of people. Some of them were following around. Other times it was new people because it was in a different area of town. And that helped us. One, it helped us because we got information from people who had already gone through this. And then two, there was an element of help that when we give our input to other people, it kind of was a bit of a healing process for us as well, too. So we had this kind of two-way healing process that was occurring. So that was one thing we did together. There was a few other things we did together, but how my wife and I handle grief is definitely very different. And, my wife is very good at bottling it up. And then it all comes together in one moment. And a lot of times that was for her the weekend. She worked all during the week, and she'd have to bottle it up because she had to be with clients and do stuff. And then the weekend was just the collapse period, and it was very difficult for her. Yeah. Me, on the other hand, I was all kind of down during the week. She was gone. I was here working at home all by myself, and it gives you lots of time to mull things. And I constantly had struggles throughout the week. And then the weekend would come, and she was home then. And I was like, okay, I'm feeling better, but she was feeling worse. So we got to really figure out how to separate that out and give ourselves a lot of grace and a lot of space. And so we tried to communicate really well. That was a big thing. We said early on, hey, if you're not doing good, please communicate that. That's a cue for me to then take action and say, okay, I'll let you be, let you fall apart. I'll find something else for me to do and that kind of stuff. That kind of helped, just the constant communication and just giving ourselves grace and space to operate differently.
Yeah, there's a lot of wisdom in that. Some couples seem to be better at that than others, but the grace and the space is so important. And it reminds me of something that I think a lot of couples, particularly in those early days and weeks and months, they hear all these statistics about what happens to marriages when parents lose a child. And generally speaking, those statistics they hear are not good. No. And I think it adds a layer of fear and anxiety and worry that's needless, because the studies actually support the opposite. There are at least 3 studies that I'm aware of, David, that support that the divorce rate with bereaved parents ranges from 12 to 16%. Some say up 12 to 17%, but it's a very low percentage compared to the general population at about 50%, and even within the Christian community, about 49 to 50%. So, I think that's a phenomenon that I wish was better understood, because it could just lift a layer of something that doesn't need to be there when you've got so many other things that are weighing you down, and that all of that pain and all that goes with it. So I always like to.
Definitely. And I think one thing that we saw with other couples that were going through this as part of, different grief groups and that, I think one sticking point that a lot of couples have, and, we said give them grace, and that's a broad term. Where I really saw it rubber meets the road was when one spouse got angry at the way another spouse was dealing with something. So, for example, one spouse could have been really going through a hard time and the other spouse was laughing at something and they were struggling with how could that spouse laugh in a moment like this,
Yeah.
not realizing that that spouse was in a different headspace at that moment in time than
Yeah.
they were. And you've got to really just make sure you don't get selfish in this. It is easy to get selfish because it's woe is me. And it's very easy to pull yourself into that selfish space. And then that kind of then plays out into this marriage because you're expecting that person to grieve in the same way you do. And when they're happy and you're not, you get angry about that. They don't feel, they're not feeling the same losses you do, or they don't care about. And that's not the case at all. Just people are just dealing with it in different cycles. And there was times where I was laughing and my wife wasn't. And I had to be very attentive to that.
Yeah, I think it is just a matter of sensitivity and just being aware of what you're observing, what your mate's going through. Yeah. And, as you guys have discovered, the fact of the matter is we don't go through the stages of grief. Some people don't go through certain ones. Some people go through all of them, but nobody goes through them in order. And a husband and wife will not go. They won't experience those different stages all at the same time.
Yeah.
So that's why that grace and space is so important.
And I feel like I've recycled through a few phases, right? So
absolutely.
There was moments. I remember the first month anniversary. I felt pretty good mentally, and I was like, "Wow, this really feels good." Even though it was 1 month anniversary, I thought, well, maybe that was it. Well, I was quite fooled because the next few weeks was really, really difficult. I just had this little moment of sunshine. And so you do kind of cycle through. I was starting to feel a little bit better at the 1 year mark. And then come about one and a half years in, I mean, it's been a struggle. It's been a slodge right now.
Yeah. So you learn to savor those moments when they happen.
Totally.
Because it is so unpredictable.
Yeah.
You know some of the ones that you're likely to struggle with because you can see them coming. It's anniversary, birthday, a holiday. But then there are those other ones that are, I call them ambushes. They just hit you from out of nowhere. It's like getting T-boned.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, each person deals with these moments differently. And, we noticed that some people, when they're coming up to different anniversary cycles, they would want to retain onto the memories, retain onto the rhythms that the family had. So maybe come Christmas, they wanted to do some of the same things that they'd done previously with Christmas. For us, we kind of took a bit of a different bent. Since our son passed away on January 17th of last year, that was right around the Christmas time. And, last time we had seen him was, very close around Christmas and stuff like that. Christmas came around and we just threw the book out the window. We didn't do any presents. We didn't set up a Christmas tree, no lights. We actually packed all up, and literally on Christmas Day, we flew straight out to Utah, went to the mountains, skied. So we went from the beach where we were living up into the mountains. We were snowmobiling as a family, and it was good. It was the change in scenery, the bonding as a family, doing activities and that were not usual. Were good for us. That's not the same for everyone. I think everyone's got to figure out what works right for them. But that was something we did. I think looking back at it was the right thing that we did, even though we weren't sure it was the right thing. We just know we didn't want to just sit around all day looking at a Christmas tree, being upset about the situation.
Well, I think it's wise to know yourself and your family because, you can't do what you think everybody expects you to do. You have to do what is going to be good, even if it totally blows up what you've always done. Because for you guys, it was right.
Yeah,
for somebody else, that might not be. So, like you said earlier, there is no playbook for this. No. I mean, there are more resources today than there were 9 years ago when we lost Ryan, but there's still not a playbook that fits every family or every individual. Let's talk about a subject that every grieving parent faces in some way, shape, or form after they lose a child, and that is other people, either family members, friends, neighbors, people at work. They often don't know what to do with us, do they? So sometimes they say things trying to help.
Yep.
And, they mean well, but sometimes it doesn't exactly come out that way, does it?
Yep. No,
So
it
what did that
doesn't.
look like for you guys?
Yeah. So, in the throes of it, when this first happened, one of the things that we were fortunate around is that both my wife and I had family that came around us very quickly.
Mm,
That was good. My family felt it was important to kind of what they called putting a hedge of protection around us.
right.
So they really isolated us in a good way, and they focused on um, taking care of us and helping us. So that helped. We also had a couple of close friends that visited us or engaged us very early on, and that was really good. And we didn't get a lot of missteps through that. I think it went pretty well. But I would tell you, once people left and we got out into the real world,
Right.
um, and we started getting into what we would call acquaintances that we had and people that we knew, and then sometimes people we didn't know,
Yeah.
that's where it all got kind of messy. And I would say it has gotten, some aspects of it have gotten messier. And I'll
Mm,
explain that here. So, in the beginning, you don't know what to say. So, for one of the first things that we were concerned about is how many kids do we say we have?
yeah.
That was hard because that's a question a lot of people ask you is, oh, great. Yeah. You're married. Great. How many kids do you have?
Yeah,
And
I know.
that was a hard thing we had to say. And then, then people sometimes will get rude and say, well, how did they die? It may not be
Uh,
something they want to talk about in that moment, and so those things were missteps that we had to kind of give people grace on. We had to really, my wife and I talked about it a lot. We struggled with it a lot privately, but publicly we tried to give people grace. There were moments where we gave it back to some people, and not
sometimes you
necessarily
have
in a
to.
bad way, but we just kind of just really laid it out and said,
Yeah.
well, that's probably not that appropriate, and this is why. And the people kind of got it. We just kind of felt it was a good opportunity to school some people
Yeah.
on
Yep.
what needed to get done. I think one of the parts that's really kind of dragged out longer, and I've talked to other people who've lost children as well, is that people expect you to get over it.
Yeah, they do.
And you have to be really, I'm always kind of being a bit careful myself talking about it a lot because, as you know, it consumes our life, right? Even now, a year and a half later, I wake up in the morning and there's an aspect of my life that's just sitting there in the back of my mind that I've lost my child. It's grayed out. And so it does impact us every day, just like it would if you were dealing with cancer on a daily basis. So sometimes you want to talk about it. We've got to be a little bit careful that we don't come in and this is the only thing that we're talking about because we don't want that relationship with people to just be about the loss of our child. But on the flip side, because we do suffer some, people have often kind of broached us and said, well, you should kind of be getting over this now. It's a year. Is this
Mm-hmm.
healthy to still be struggling with this thing?
Yeah.
And on the surface, you can get mad. There's no doubt. I get angry inside. By the other surface, I'm like, they did not go through this. And when
No.
I had not gone through this, I had no clue how bad it was. They had no clue how bad it was. But I can tell those people, who may be listening to this, who may have a person lost, it is really, really bad. And these people need to grieve, and they're going to grieve in different ways. We've got some people who the first year was a little bit easier, and the second year was really bad. And some people where first and second year are bad. And even when 3 or 4 years or 5 years down the road, you're still going to be dealing with this. It doesn't
Yeah.
go away. It's still a big part of your life. It's still a struggle as an individual. There's things you've missed now because your kid's gone and things that you expected from your kids. My kid was awesome with kids. Hudson was just phenomenal with kids. I mean, just loved them to death. I
Yeah.
mean, if there's a bunch of little kids around, he'd go sit down with the little kids and put his arm around them and help them out and encourage them and stuff like that. And we were just so much excited one day when he became a parent. I'm like, man, he's going to be an awesome dad because
Yeah.
this kid's better with kids than I was. And so, but we missed that. So when you
Yeah.
see friends of his getting married and friends of his now having kids, that's hard, and you really can struggle with that as a parent, and people around you just don't know about that, right? They just go on and their life's going on and they forget about it because that was 3 years ago, and they equate it to like a death of a pet or maybe a death of a parent, which are both bad, but just not quite in the same way.
Right. Right. And it's all a matter of perspective. As you said, if it hasn't happened to you, you don't get it. And the truth of the matter is, we wouldn't want anybody to
No.
really be able to get it because the only way that can happen is for you to lose a child. But
Yep.
I think that I think it's just a matter of being sensitive and thinking before you speak, and realizing that you know what, you can show up and you don't have to have any magic words, because
No.
even if you could come up with them, they wouldn't help,
Yep.
because it is a lifelong healing process. You don't ever get over losing a child. You
No.
get through it a day at a time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you don't get over it. You learn to live through it and with it, right? So you learn to, someone said the pain doesn't get any smaller. You just learn to get bigger around that pain. It's still the same size, and you just learn on how to grow around it, with it still being there just as big as it was day one.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like getting, a significant cut or a wound or something, and even though it heals, often leaves a big scar.
Yep,
And that scar
exactly.
it'll always remind you of what happened. Some scars are more sensitive than others, but
Yep,
it's still there, and it'll be there probably in all likelihood for the rest of your life.
exactly.
It's a lot like that, losing a child, isn't it?
Yep, it is
Yeah.
definitely.
So, is there any other advice that you would give those other people who really do want to help grieving parents, but don't really know what to do or what to say? So sometimes they just have a tendency to shy away from us. Give us
Yep.
a wide berth if they see us coming coming towards them in the grocery store. So
Yep.
what would you say to them as a grieving parent?
I think it's almost the flip side of what you've said, which is don't give us necessarily a wide berth. Be there
Yeah,
for us. Just talk to us. Come over and drop something off to us. Just remember us, right? And
right.
you don't have to have magic words to say to someone going through it. I think sometimes just recognizing that they could be going through something, sending a quick note, hey, thinking about you. I've got a group of friends who constantly check in on me every couple of weeks. Hey, how are things going, and what's going on and stuff like that. That kind of stuff helps, right? It makes you recognize, oh, people
Yeah.
do remember what I'm going through. We've been careful bringing it up because it's also kind of a downer.
Oh
you
yeah.
know, you don't want to, you kind of, if we're with a group of friends and conversations are going well, we try to make sure we avoid our problem because it can really just change the entire emotional aspect of it. So we will hold things back. It doesn't mean that we're not struggling and that kind of stuff. And I think having people just be attentive to the fact that what this individual is going through will be the rest of their life, and just coming alongside them as just a normal person and a friend, checking in on them, remembering them, dropping them a note, maybe doing something for them. Hey, I know you're struggling. I'm going to come mow your lawn for you or something, or maybe just come and mow the lawn
Yeah.
and don't even tell you. Now, that's not something I need, but I could definitely see other people that may need stuff like that.
Sure.
And so that has been some of the great stuff, is people just remember and said, hey, we're thinking about you. Boom.
Yeah,
And
that's huge.
that was great.
Yeah, and a little secret, we're not contagious.
No, you won't catch what we have.
Nope, nope, you won't. And the other thing that I think sometimes people really don't know how to handle is, I think they're afraid if they say our child's name, it's going to cause us a lot of pain. The opposite's true, isn't it?
Yeah.
We love to hear other people talk about our child or ask about our child. So please ask.
Yeah, and I think, just the other day I was talking to my brother and he found a photo of my son with his son. And we've been collecting photos because
Yeah.
during their childhood we collect them, they're in boxes and stuff, or they're on our phone, but now we're like really hoarding them. And he had a photo that I just didn't have, and he's like, "Hey, I found this photo." I was like, "Oh, can you send that to me?" And he sent it to me, and that was it was awesome because it's a picture into his life that, yeah, I remember it, but I remember it in a different way, actually seeing the image of it and that, and just remembering them. And yeah, to me that was great. So yeah, bring up memories and stuff like that. My brother will do that sometimes. I'll have friends that'll say something about my son, and it's awesome.
It
I love it.
is. Yeah, we felt the same way. So we give people an open invitation. Talk about Ryan. We're at the point now where we can laugh about the funny things that he did. because like Hudson, he was always trying to make everybody laugh.
Oh, yeah.
So now we can laugh about him. We can laugh just like if he were in the room with us.
No,
And
totally.
it's such a blessing to be able to get to that point.
Yeah, I think the first time I really laughed about the whole situation, I was going through his phone actually. It took us a while to get access to his phone and everything, and so I was able to grab a video he had taken. We'd gone fishing way up in northern Canada, and we were out on a boat, him and I, all by ourselves, and we were reeling in. And he took this video of me pulling. We were fly fishing. I pulled in a fish, and this thing was like maybe a little bit bigger than a minnow. And he was just laughing his head off and making fun of the whole thing. He's like, pull it in, Dad. It's so hard. It's a fighter. And I watched that video, and I can't tell you how many times I just sat there and kept watching it and kept watching. Each time I just laughed as hard as I could because, again, it was just that memory of like his personality. Sometimes photos don't always show personality, but that video just shined through it. So that was the first time I laughed, and I was just like, wow, that was a really good feeling. I hope I get more of those. Now, I don't have them every day. But getting those is great.
Those are treasures.
Yeah.
Yep. And you will have more days like that. You guys are still in a pretty fresh season.
We are.
Yeah.
We are.
Let me ask you one last thing, David, because you are a businessman, and I think sometimes men, after losing a child, really struggle with the whole issue of how am I going to go back to work and just process through this when I've got all of these responsibilities and I've got people to talk with, and the list just goes on and on and on. Is there anything that you could say to that guy who's going to be listening to this conversation?
Yeah, so I'll tell you right at the moment of everyone leaving the house and going, and I had to start facing reality at that point because really during the 2-3 weeks after this had happened, I didn't care what happened at work. I didn't check emails, nothing. They could have fired me. I wouldn't have cared. Yeah. After everyone left, I told my wife, I said, can we just sell everything, buy a van, and go drive around the country and just quit? Because there's an element of you that just wants to run.
Yeah.
Right? You want to run. And you think that it's going to change, that changing your surroundings is going to change. It doesn't, right? This is a problem. It's embedded inside of you. You run, it's just coming right with you wherever you go. And so a lot of times people are like, well, I want to quit my job and change and go do something else. And, for me, I looked at it, as I said, things aren't going to change. I can't run from this. I've got to figure out how to kind of make this work and do that. I can tell you that I took it easy going back into work and took my time as I got acclimated. But I will tell you that one thing that was good for me at least was keeping busy. The busier I was, and the more my mind was engaged, the more it didn't wander. Yeah. And for me personally, wandering is a challenge because if I'm just sitting there not engaged, my mind wanders, and it's probably not a good place where it's wandering, and it gets you into the dark hole, and it gets you upset and depressed, and these kinds of things about the situation that you're in. So I gave myself a little bit of an ease getting into it, but then I worked really hard at trying to keep myself engaged all the time, and I felt the more. And some people say, well, they're just hiding it, but I did try to give myself moments, like on the weekends or in the evening or something, to kind of decompress, let it all kind of fill me. But during the day, try to keep myself busy so that I just didn't lull into this just constant darkness and down in the dump.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, and I think that's one of the aspects of grief that so many men just really, really struggle with. So thank you for sharing that. Well, David Szweda, it has been such an honor to have you today. Thank you for sharing your story. Thanks for your transparency and for letting us into your story.
Thank you very much, Greg, and thank you for letting me share my story. I hope it helps others, and it's also good therapy just kind of talk about it sometimes.
It sure is.
Share the stories.
Well, it's like I said, it has been an honor to have you, and I know that other men and women, for that matter, are going to be encouraged and find some hope in your message.
Thank you.
Yeah, man. Thank you. Well, thank you for joining us today. If you would like to offer your thoughts on today's episode, simply click the link under the episode summary. And if you're interested in sharing your story on a future episode, email us using the provided link. Join us again in 2 weeks to hear another story of how God meets us in our pain, creates something beautiful from the broken pieces, and restores meaning, purpose, and hope.